Welcome to this is actually the fourth in the series on the entire textbook of A Course in Miracles. One chapter per month. It's going to take at least 3 years to get through this, as you can see, but it's going to. That means I hope that you're reading chapters as we're going along, and you can bring your book with you. It's not necessary, but it may be helpful if you find a passage that you kind of mark, or you have put a question mark in the margin or something. If there's something in there that you'd like to bring up, we'll bring it up. I would like to begin this afternoon with a story. Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, there was a king and a queen who had a beautiful 3-year-old son who had a very distinctive birthmark on his back right shoulder. One evening, thieves broke in to the palace. They killed the king and the queen, and they abducted the young prince. The minister found the body of the king and the queen the next morning and concluded that the prince had been abducted. They began searching for the prince, but as it turns out, the thieves had taken him hundreds of miles away, where they had turned him over to an older farm couple that they met along the road. So the boy was not found for many years. Finally, after about 20 years, he was found. But they didn't want to tell the boy about who he was. They wanted the minister to come and verify what the birthmark looked like to be sure it was the right person. So the minister came, met the boy, and he told the boy the story. He wanted to see if the boy would remember anything at all about those early years. So he told him a story about there was a king and a queen, and how they had been killed, and how they had a prince who'd been abducted, and how it was a legend in this land that someday the prince would be found, and once he was found and put back into his position, he would restore the prosperity that had once been the part of that land. And the young farm boy got very excited, and he said, "This is wonderful news. I'm so glad to hear. Someday I will meet this prince, and he will bring all of these benefits to our country." And then the minister says, "Well, I have to tell you that you are that prince." And the boy looks around and he doesn't, "What are you talking about? It couldn't possibly be me. I'm not this prince." And the minister says, "Actually, I have irrefutable evidence to prove that it is you." And he told him about the birthmark. When he told him about the birthmark, he realized, well, that maybe there was some truth in that, because he did have this. And then to prove it, the minister asked the couple who had been caring for the boy, "Did you give birth to this boy?" And they said, "No, he was left to us by some strangers who were passing through our village about 20 years ago." Well, the funny part was that each day after that, the boy would wake up thinking that he was still a peasant farmer. And it was very hard for him to adjust to this idea that he was actually a prince. That's the story of A Course in Miracles. The story of A Course in Miracles is that you are a child of God. You are actually a perfect child of God. You've always been a perfect child of God. That's something which can't be taken away from you. But we forget who we really are. We forget our true identity. So the Course is really trying to help us to awaken and to remember once again, but it takes practice. It takes a lot of work to realize that you're actually this prince or princess, the child of God, and you're actually just going back to your rightful home. We're just trying to help you remember that there's a lot in the Course about remembering about, as I said in previous presentation, recognizing, recollecting, coming back to the truth of the identity, because the world, as it's presented to us, is really kind of a masquerade. And I think after a while we get, and there's so much about it it's so difficult to understand. It's really important to understand the metaphysics of the Course in order to get the Course. Because if you don't understand, it's kind of all flipped around backwards. It's actually like a complete reverse, and it's like looking in a mirror, and you don't realize that you're seeing it all backwards. It looks like the world that we see is a real world. The Course is very clear that what we're experiencing actually, what the Course calls the dreaming of the world. So we dream the world. And the way that we dream the world is we dream it by projecting it. We project the world. We make up the world we see. And we make it up with all of our interpretations and all of our analysis that we are just constantly throwing onto the world. It's just almost as though you can't stop doing it, but you can stop doing it. That's what there's people do have occasional experiences where it stops. I want to share with you today a couple of books that I've read recently that I expect some of you have also been reading, and I'll talk more about them in more detail later. But how many of you read Proof of Heaven by Dr. Jon Mundy? This is an incredible report of, this is a neurosurgeon who had a profound death experience in a coma and had these incredible breakthroughs. And a lot of what he talks about here sounds exactly like what the Course in Miracles is talking about, which is very interesting. That's the breakthrough. The second one, which is also really incredible, is Dying to Be Me by Anita Moorjani. Some of you read Dying to Be Me, 2 or 3 of you have. So let me just tell you a little bit about her experience, then I'll get into chapter 2. Anita Moorjani is an Indian woman, but she grew up in Hong Kong because her father had a business in Hong Kong, I think a cloth merchant or something like that. And she got cancer, and it actually became quite severe over a period of 3 years or so. She got down to the point where she was weighing 95 pounds. She was completely covered with these lemon-sized welts of where the glands had filled with cancer. It got down to the point where, actually in her last day, so to speak, all of her internal organs except for her heart stopped working. So her liver wasn't working, and nothing was really working. They were forcing oxygen into her body. It was the only thing that was kind of keeping her alive and keeping her heart beating. The liver stopped, the kidney stopped, etc. They take her to the hospital, and the doctors explained to her husband and mother and family that she will die that night. That it's only a matter of a few, and that there's really nothing that she's just too far gone. But she has this incredible out-of-body experience, like all the NDE experiences that we read about, right? And one of the things that's really interesting about this is that she sees herself, right, out, and her experience and even Alexander's are very different, but they're very similar. She doesn't have these same kind of breakthroughs into heaven, but she has this point where she's sort of witnessing everything that's going on in the hospital, not only in her room, but also what's going on in other rooms. And she can talk about the conversations that are being held about her, but at the same time, she's in this absolutely blissful state. Partly because she doesn't have this sick, diseased body anymore, right? It's no longer weighing her down, and she's trying to say to her husband and to her mother, I'm fine, everything is perfect. And that's very important, everything is perfect, right? And she really saw everything as being perfect and whole and complete. And she talks about this experience that the Course also talks about of oneness. And she says right here on the front of her book, I had the choice to come back or not. I chose to return when I realized that heaven is a state, not a place. Now what the Course in Miracles says is that heaven is not a place or a condition. It is merely an awareness of perfect oneness. So this is a point at which I think it becomes really, really difficult for us to understand this whole metaphysical background for the Course, and yet it's really necessary to understand this. What the Course says, what Anita Moorjani says, what Dr. Eben Alexander are all saying is it's all mind. Okay, so the physical space-time dimension, which we seem to be very much involved in, largely because we have these bodies which take up space, and they seem to live in time. So it seems like there's this story going on, if you will, or this dream that's going on. That seems like what's really, really happening. But that's not what's really happening. What's really happening is all a matter of mind. The thing about mind is that mind does not take up space. I mean, where is, when Anita, where is, I mean, this is really an interesting question. When Anita Moorjani has this experience of hearing conversations that are going on and seeing, what is it that's hearing and seeing? And the same thing can be said of Dr. Eben Alexander in his experience. What is it? And he makes it really clear that it's not him. That he had completely lost any kind of, and I had a similar experience in '76, maybe at some other point I'll tell you about this, and also an experience of being in a coma for actually over a week. And both of them described coming back was a little difficult. Not difficult in the sense of they continued to see things the way they were seeing them as a part of the experience. So they could see through, excuse my language for a second, the bullshit of the world, right? And like the news had no interest to them, or things that were going on in polite conversations, those kind of game playing things that were so easily, they could just kind of, they saw it, but kind of also overlooked it. Well, let's begin to get into chapter 2, because this is talking about this sense of separation that we all experience from the whole, from wholeness, right? Yes.
May I ask a really quick question?
Sure.
I read both of the books.
Right.
I enjoyed them.
Right.
This summer, there was an article in Esquire magazine about Dr. Eben Alexander. He's lost his surgical privileges at 3 hospitals.
Oh, really?
There are a handful of patients that had the wrong vertebrae fused
Oh, really?
by him, have facial paralysis, are in pain. He's been the defendant in multiple medical malpractice suits. It was a pretty damning article.
Right.
Which is not to say he did have spinal meningitis, he was in a coma.
Right,
I believe he had these experiences.
Right.
The man is, as all of us are, does that take away from his story? Is it relevant?
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, that would be really hard to make any kind of judgment about that at all. I wouldn't want to go there.
Okay.
Because it does require judgment, right? Which is the very thing that we're looking to kind of avoid. Okay. So, I created a little poem. It's up on the upper right-hand side. I'm not sure it's a little poem that I wrote. Once upon a tiny tick of time, there came a thought into the mind. There came a supposition, nothing more than a minuscule cognition. A rumor rolled around inside the mind like many a myth that made us blind. A fantasy, a wisp of wit led to a most incredible split. What if we're possible to pull off a fantastic fraud? What if I could think a thought outside of the mind? That really explains how the separation occurred. Now, there's an important thing to understand about the separation. It never happened. This is crucial in terms of understanding the metaphysics of the Course. It certainly looks like it happened. Mythologically speaking, there is a story we talked about at the first session that we did that everybody knows, which is namely the story of Adam and Eve, which explains in a good way what did occur, which did not occur. Not trying to get anybody confused, but actually, it never actually happened. It just looked like it happened. So it looks like, that's why our whole experience is a dream. And I think we discover that it's a dream in part as we wake. One of the ways I'm sure that we'll all kind of become more aware of this is when we actually do leave these bodies. You don't have to leave your body to become aware of this. The Course is trying to help us to very slowly and very gently come around to the same conclusions without having to go through some sort of radical experience or without having a mystical experience. What I want to do in another book that I'm starting to work on, I want to take the mystics' descriptions of their experiences, these folks plus others' descriptions of their near-death experiences, some of what comes out of psychedelic research, and what the Course in Miracles says about death and heaven, and put this all together, because it's all different arrows which are pointing to the same experience. And I think it's so exciting that we're in a position now where we can begin to explore this as really never before, because we have, I think, like the experiences that happened to Evan is his name, and to Morjani, have probably happened to a lot of people over the course of history, but they weren't erudite, they didn't have a way to talk about it. If you don't sit down right away and write it down and begin to go over it in your own mind, it kind of disappears like it was a dream, or if you tell other people about it, they may kind of regard you as being a bit of a nut. So after a while, people don't talk about it. At least that's my guess is what's happened in the course of history in other ages for other people, right? So I'm just going to highlight some of the lines from the Course. So the body is the central figure in the dreaming of the world. So it really looks like our bodies. It seems very, very clear. That's the biggest probably point that the Course makes in terms of its incredible emphasis on the fact you are not a body. A body is a very temporal experience. It only lasts for a moment. Shakespeare is right without breathe, candle. And yet at the moment, it may seem to endure. And if you're in pain or there's something that's very heavy about the body, you're not enjoying this body. And actually, Gandhi said it was a prison, and the ancient Greeks used to refer to it as a tomb. You know, if that's what your experience is, then it's not a fun experience for an awful lot of people. A lot of people don't even want to be here, but it looks like we've got to be here. So what the body is, of course, is very clear. It says the body is a learning device. So it's a tool or an instrument. And we're here to learn something with this tool, with this instrument, to hopefully get around to the point where you can be like Morjani or the others, totally free of the thing. And yet something continues, which is really described as being wholeness or oneness or completeness. It's really reuniting the mind with the mind of God. Going further down. The world has not yet experienced any comprehensive reawakening. Such a rebirth is impossible as long as you continue to project or miscreate. So the Course, the primary tool that we use to create the world, to make the world, is called, as we said, projection, which again is all the judgment we throw out onto the world. And we're always doing it all the time. That's the thing to just be. One of my students came to me after about 4 weeks of being in a class once, and she says, I'm beginning to realize how incredibly judgmental I am. And I said, fantastic, you're getting it. I mean, the whole process is one of learning how to stop this judgment, because it's an addiction. It's constant. Even if you become aware of it, it still sneaks in the back door, and you keep catching yourself slipping into it and slipping into it and slipping into it. Now the Course says there's two kinds of rejection. One is a form of miscreation, and then one is a form of creation. So the miscreation is the one by which we make up the world. Mostly what we're doing with the world is we're damning the hell out of it. And we're just finding all of these problems that we can see around us. So 9/11 was this last week, and they were playing one of the shows that I was watching, where people calling up and screaming at anybody who was from the East that, go home, we don't want you here, and the suffering that some of our Arab friends and others were experiencing at that time. So it's just filled with the problem. And then actually today is the anniversary, I guess you all know, of the bombing of the Birmingham church where the 4 little girls were killed 50 years ago today. And think about the projection that had to be behind that, just to say that there was something wrong there, so wrong that that had to be stopped in some sort of way. Right? Interestingly enough, what that event produced, of course, was a complete reversal from what they intended. I was listening to one commentator who said he thought that was probably one of the most singular events which led to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 passing and going through. Right, so these 4 little girls lost their lives, but it was an event that changed everything. You get the opposite from what you intend to get when you go in that direction. Right? But it's all projection. It's all finding something that's really evil, something that's really wrong, in this case, in some place that was completely innocent, had nothing to do. Right? So, all minds project or extend. So we're always projecting or extending. So what extending is, extension is love. So we're either loving everything, we're sending our love out, we're blessing it, we're appreciating whatever the experience is that we're having, we're loving nature, we're loving other people. It's just kind of, it's a natural experience, it's a positive, high experience to be extending love. Heaven, God extends His love. God extends, that's how you got created, through the extension of God's love. And it's your job, actually, to continue to extend that creation. Just as God has created you, so are you to continue with that creation. The problem is that we try to create ourselves, and then we become self-made men and women. That's the trying to think the thought outside of the mind of God. You actually can't do that. The trying to do that is the thing which has given rise to this whole world. So another really important concept in the Course, which is really hard for a lot of people to hear, it's on lesson 132. It says, there is no world. This is the central thought this Course attempts to teach. Because there's nothing, here's 2 more points, there's nothing outside of you. Where's the kingdom of heaven? Inside you. But it's in the mind. It's not in the body. And where's the mind? The mind does not have a form. We are incredibly fascinated with form. We identify with form. We identify with how things look. And to the ego, if it looks good, if it looks cool, that's what really matters. But that's just the part of the dreaming of the world. So, on to the right-hand column of the first page. The inappropriate use of extension and projection occurs when you believe that some emptiness or lack exists in you, and that you, I put the word think in there, you can fill it with your own ideas instead of truth. This process involves the following steps. So let's look at these 4 steps. 1, you believe. On the first page, on the right-hand column, on the second side. Okay? And beginning in the number 7. You believe that what God created can be changed by your own mind. That's actually an absurd idea. That would have to come out of arrogance. To actually think that what God created can be changed by your mind. Right? So you're just going to go off into your little fantasy world. You're going to create your own world. Well, creating your own world is a very lonely world that you're creating, because it's a place of isolation and separation and segregation. It's not a part of the wholeness of the mind of God. 2, you believe that what is perfect can be rendered imperfect or lacking. Again, of course, if God created you perfect, you are perfect. So that goes back to the story I told at the beginning of the afternoon. You are already perfect. This isn't arrogance. This is the truth of reality, of who you are and who everyone else is. and this is really where the Course gets hard, is you have to be able to see this in everyone else. All right? And being able to see this in literally in everyone else. I won't do it right now, but yeah, I will. I'll probably make reference to this particular, I think it's page 167. Chapter 9, section 3, for anybody's got a book with it. Just to highlight a few, I may have done this before. Paragraph 5, first sentence. It's on page 167, and if you've got the second, or the FIP edition. I will always be working from the FIP edition. When a brother behaves insanely, you can heal him only by perceiving the sanity in him. Very important. If a brother behaves insanely, you can heal him only by perceiving the sanity in him. If you perceive his errors and accept them, you are accepting yours. So, to condemn someone else is to condemn yourself. Right? That's why, I make note of this down here, there's no communication between the Holy Spirit and the ego, for the very simple reason that the Holy Spirit does not recognize the ego, because there is no ego. It doesn't exist. There's no such thing. So how could you recognize something that doesn't exist? It's a part of the fantasy. It's a part of the illusion of the world, from which we all awaken as we remember the truth of who we really are. So this is where it becomes a challenge. This is a work. This is why we have the workbook, because we have to go through this process very, very slowly, because as the Course says, you have been very poorly taught. Right? So we literally have to relearn to get. And it says, as you go forward, you go back. What it means by as you go forward, you go back, is that as you go forward in your learning, you go back to the truth of who you really are. You go back to that remembrance of the truth of who you really are. We have to go forward in order to get back there, to get back home. It's always home. We're always getting back home again, always going back to God, always returning to the truth. So let's start talking about what the atonement is. So the atonement, go to page 2. So the atonement is this process by which we return home to heaven. The word atonement in the Course does not mean at-one-ment, which a lot of people kind of make that conclusion. I guess you could say in a sense, in the finally, in the ultimate sense, it gets us to that, but that's not what the Course means. It says very, very clearly that what we mean by the word atonement is the undoing. So it's the undoing of the illusion, and the illusion is that you are an ego. It's the undoing of the whole world as we have made it up inside our own mind. The whole illusion that you, for example, are somebody. Nobody's anybody. I have a CD over here. It's called "I'm Nobody, Who Are You?" Maybe I'll do that for you at some point. Which is really about the mythology of the self, because it's really a lot of what we're doing here is we're breaking down the mythology of thinking that we're somebody special. It's the specialness which gets us into trouble. Right? So nobody's better than you are, no one's worse than you are, we're literally all the same, but that becomes a challenge for us to be able to see that. So, not only that, but going on down page 2, that column, the sole responsibility of the miracle worker is to accept the atonement, that is the undoing of the ego for himself. That is your job. That is your sole job. That is your only job, to accept the atonement for yourself. As we accept this for ourselves, it undoes the whole mess. And the analogy that I like to use is, if you have like a gold chain or maybe a pair of we all have these earphones now that And then you know how they get knots and things all, and then it's very easy, but everybody can understand that one, and you spend some time trying to undo those, right? Well, that's kind of like what it says, inside our psychic systems are filled with knots. Actually, in psychology, they're called complexes or coexes, right? So they're these places that inside that we get stuck around. Maybe you got some hurt thing happened. It's interesting, in Anita Marjani's book, she talks about being able to see that her whole life was this great tapestry, and that everything that happened in it was a part of what was supposed to happen. And in fact, also in even Alexander's book, he comes up with this really interesting conclusion that I'm sure drives a lot of people crazy, which is that you can do nothing wrong. And now this is actually in keeping with the Course in Miracles. All right. You actually can do nothing wrong, because anything that it's really just a part of your learning process. And you didn't know any better, so this is a part of what you need to learn, whatever stuck place it is that you get caught in. So again, Anita Marjani is talking about that she could see in this great tapestry how even the bully who bullied her when she was in grade school. She was an Indian girl in a white school, or I guess for kind of wealthy folks in Hong Kong at the time that this experience occurred, right? How even he was an important part. But he also became a point of stuckness, right? That person that rejected you back there somewhere, or whatever, the parent or whatever it was. So that becomes a knot in the psychic system, which then has to be, then the real word here is to use is for forgiven. This is where forgiveness comes in. The forgiveness is that we're letting go of the whole idea that was somehow another hurtful to us. The truth of the matter is you can't be hurt. You cannot be, your body can be hurt. But your mind, if you know who you are, in truth, there's no way you cannot be insulted. It would be only an ego could be insulted. You're not an ego. So how could you be insulted, right? If you take an insult seriously, then you are buying into the ego's game and the ego's play. That's why the Course is constantly talking about getting above the battlefield, getting up to a point where we can kind of look. And again, when you read Anita Marjani and Dr. Even Alexander, after this experience, they're able to see above the battlefield. You get this higher view. The Course is trying to help us to get there all the time and just sort of stay there. Yes?
You know what's interesting about the knot analogy?
Yeah.
Which I've been thinking about, is that when you undo the knot,
There's nothing there.
there's nothing.
There's nothing. She's a little ahead of me. I was going there. Yeah, that's what's exciting about it. I mean, when you get the knot, let's say you got a gold chain, it gets really knotted, and it's really hard to get that out of there. And it's also interesting, how do you get the knot undone? The way you undo the knot is reverse the process by which it was created, right? So you have to reverse the process by which it got, which is really the forgiveness process, right? You reverse the process by which it got created, and then as you do that, you eventually get down, as Amy was just saying, to the point where there's nothing there. And there never was anything there. Some little kinky thing happened, kinky, and you made something out of it. It became an issue in your mind. You got a hurt festered around the thing. But then it's stuck. You carried it into your adult life as well, right? Rather than just being able to go, Ruth?
Where I sometimes get stuck, and probably other people too, is what about the tapestry from the bully's perspective?
Yeah, I don't, Ruth's question, I'll repeat these for the sake of the camera. What about the tapestry as far as the bully's perspective? That would be, everybody's in their own place, right? So it actually all fits together somehow or another. And there was a lesson in there for the bully too, right? So the bully would have a tapestry in which actually his attack upon Anita Marjani was a part of his process. And now he's got to undo that. And you really undo that by forgiving yourself. I mean, by forgiving yourself for having been stupid. You know, for having made wrong choices. You know, that's, even as I was growing up as a young, going to a Baptist church in Missouri, I was never able to understand the whole concept of hell. Because the whole idea that you had to go for eternity to hell because you made some bad choices because you just weren't bright enough. I mean, you just were stupid, you know, and that was going to ruin things forever and forever. Eternal fires of hell because you had lusty thoughts or something like that. That's the insanity of the ego, right? All right, proceeding on with the Course talks about the atonement as a defense. We all probably know about ego defense mechanisms. If you've ever spent any time, even a basic course in psychology, will teach about reaction formation, rationalization. You can keep running on a whole bunch of defenses that the ego uses to protect itself. The Course talks about the atonement as a defense as well, but it says it's the only defense which cannot hurt. Right? It's the only defense which can actually heal. And the way it heals again is that it undoes the process. It's in that undoing that the healing occurs, because we return home again. As the ego is undone, we find that there's nothing there to start with. Reading from the next part of the Course. The atonement is entirely unambiguous. It is perfectly clear because it exists in light. Only the attempts to shroud it in darkness have made it inaccessible to those who do not choose to see. So all of the other defenses, actually all the other defenses the Course talks about are a two-edged sword. A two-edged sword means they can hurt or they can be used to heal, actually, too. Given in the right hands, right? Just as a scalpel can be used to hurt or to heal in the process. So we're just undoing this whole complex mess by pulling out of the insanity of our own minds. Going down, God's children are guiltless, the bottom of page 2. But the content of the Course never changes. Its central theme is always God's Son is guiltless, and in his innocence is his salvation. So you are guiltless. You can't be guilty and perfect at the same time, right? How could you see yourself as being perfect, but being holding on to guilt? I think I told you, did I tell you the story about coming to Helen once over guilt issue about a woman that was dating? Did I tell it? I forget where I do certain stories, so I'll tell this story. This actually happened here, 4 or 5 blocks from where we are right now, on East 17th Street. So this is 38 years ago. It's 40 years ago. No, 38 years ago. Right? So there was this lady that I had started to see, and I decided I didn't want to continue this. I broke off the relationship. And she got very upset. She got really, really angry. And started doing these really unpleasant things, like calling at 2 o'clock in the morning and letting the phone ring. I was living inside a General Theological Seminary at the time. And she came over to see me unannounced, and when the guard at the door told her I wasn't home, she picked a cup of coffee off his desk and threw it in his face. She literally physically attacked another woman I was starting to date at the time, waiting outside the door, and when we came out, she physically attacked her. So I was feeling really guilty about this because I had hurt someone. That's what guilt is. You hurt someone, you really, really hurt this person. So I went to see Helen. And Helen, gave some interesting advice for that. Helen's advice was that I should talk to her. Don't go back, don't make any promises, don't, just hear her out, just talk to her, right? And then the last thing that Helen said before I left, she reached out and she touched my knee. And whenever Helen touched my knee, I knew I should pay attention. It was always a good clue, this is important, I want you to think. But she touched my knee and she says, you know you're not guilty. I told Helen she did not know what she was talking about. I am guilty. I did this thing. I hurt this person. Well, that same night, 2 o'clock in the morning, the phone starts to ring. And I get up and I answer the phone. We talked until daylight. And I go, yeah, she's a friend to this day. All right. She still calls. 2 or 3 times a year, but she never stays on the phone for more than 5 minutes. She always calls on my birthday. We have literally stayed friends all this time. It all got remarkably healed, but she needed me to pay attention to it a little bit, a good little bit as it turned out. But it worked, right? It's a wonderful example. A little miracle actually occurred. But it was interesting I didn't know the course well enough at that point to understand what Helen meant when she said, you know, you're not guilty. But I wanted to believe her. I wanted to, but that's true. That's true in terms of all of us, even in terms of the insane things that we've done in our past. We have to really wind up forgiving ourselves for having made those choices. And realizing that we are actually perfect. We're a perfect child of God. Next page. Each one you see, you place within the holy circle of atonement or leave outside, judging him fit for crucifixion or for redemption. If you bring him into the circle of purity, you will rest there with him. If you leave him without, you join him there. So this is how we're always doing this to ourselves. You cannot condemn someone else without condemning yourself. Actually, to put someone else down is to put yourself down. It's actually to lower yourself in the process of attempting to lower anybody else. Going on. It says, only after a deep sleep fell upon Adam could he experience nightmares. So the separation is a form of sleeping. It's the whole idea that we can be separate from God. But only as we start sleeping do we experience these nightmares. What happens when you have a dream at night? Who's projecting that dream? You're the projector, right? You're making up the dream. And you notice that there's almost always some anxiety element within the dream. You're being chased, or you're worried about something being found out, or something is not working. And then you wake up and there's a lot of other things that aren't working in your world, in your life, bills that have to be paid, health issues, children issues, whatever it is, it's just a part of the continuing of the dream. I'm sure I said here before, I think one of the ways that we could talk about what the Course is talking about is talking about progressively raising our awareness so that we're becoming more and more and more and more and more and more aware all the time. So that means you're waking out of the sleep. So that as you become more and more and more and more aware, it's less and less and less likely that you're going to be doing these dumb, stupid, unconscious kinds of things. That is, by making choices which are going to be bringing you down and getting you caught in an addiction or an obsessive behavior or an compulsive behavior, anything like that. It's going exactly the opposite direction from that. And I'm going on down to the atonement as defense. You can do anything I ask. I have asked you to perform miracles and have made it clear that miracles are natural, corrective, healing, and universal. There is nothing they cannot do, but they cannot be performed in the spirit of doubt or fear. Once again, I have to ask if I told the story about the epileptic boy. All right, I'll do the story about the epileptic boy. This is a story from the Bible. So they bring a boy to Jesus who suffers from epilepsy. Now, in Jesus, the historical Jesus day, epilepsy, of course, they knew nothing about misfiring of the neurons in the brain. So it looked like this person would become possessed. And so they called it demon possession. And the father is particularly concerned because he says he will fall into the fire or he'll fall into the water, and someone has to always watch him because he can hurt himself if he's not being. All of a sudden he would just go into these fits, and it would look like something had happened and it wasn't him that was doing it. Something had possessed him, taken over his body. It says, we took him to your disciples, but your disciples were not able to effect a cure. And the next line, it says, and Jesus looked at him and loved him. And from that moment he was made well. Now think about this. What I just read, it cannot be performed in a state of fear or doubt. So everybody else, as they look at this boy, you never know when he's going to go into a fit, right? So there's always this fear. It's like, what? You never know when he could flip out, and it's just like, what's going on with this? Suddenly there's this somebody that looks at him with total love. In other words, who sees the wholeness, who sees the innocence, who sees the completeness. That becomes the challenge of the child. To look here in this most difficult situation and see the absolute wholeness that's still there. Now, the boy looks back and sees the love. There's two kinds of projection, right? There's the projection which is condemnatory or fearful, and then there's the projection which is called extension, which is loving. So now it's love which is coming at him, and not fear which is coming at him. And he realizes that there's a possibility that he can be whole. Now this particular passage from the Bible is also interesting because the next section in there, after that these events occurred, the disciples come to Jesus and they say, why weren't we able to effect a cure? And Jesus says, because you didn't believe that you could. And then that's where we got this great line of, if you had the faith of a grain of mustard seed, you could say to that mountain, move, and it would move, right? So it's really a matter of the faith in this, really believing that this is true and this is possible. We're about to get into, as we go a little bit further into this chapter, it talks a lot about the power of the mind. I'm going to get there in just a moment. You do not realize how incredibly powerful the mind is. Let's go on down. So the Course also talks about a proper kind of denial, which is to deny the error. Nothing can actually hurt you. The very bottom of the third page on the left. The atonement principle was in effect long before the atonement began. The principle was love, and the atonement was an act of love. See, that's what happened with Jesus there, was an act of love, right? Acts were not necessary before the separation because belief in space and time did not exist. Again, this is really heavy-duty metaphysics. Belief in space and time did not exist. Obviously, we believe in space and time because we're in bodies in space and time, which again is also a kind of a trap. Again, if you read Anita Marjani's experience or even Alexander's, they're not in space-time at the time they're having these experiences. It's outside of it. It doesn't occur in time. They both talk about this. The time loses, there's no, it's as though everything is happening at once. They both say, and the Course says this too, everything is happening at once. It's not a matter of sequence. We experience time as sequence. What's actually happening, of course, is it's actually the only state, which is a real state, is an eternal state. pick up Webster's dictionary, look up the definition of eternity, and it says, eternity is a state of timelessness. By definition, there's no time. Now again, this is a stretch for us because we certainly seem to live in time. But ultimately is a really important word. Ultimately, there's no time. Ultimately, you're not a body. Ultimately, there's no world. This is why the course is both very, very, very exciting and very, very difficult all at the same time. Because trying to grasp the truth of this, but I think we're beginning to get ready for it. That's the whole idea. We're beginning to get ready for this idea that this is all possible. So, top of page 3. So let me be clear, the body is in the mind is not in the body. Right? It's the mind that's determining everything, including the mind's thought now that you have a body. And you will continue to think that until you don't have one anymore. I didn't know where Johnny's experience was that she didn't have her body anymore. And even Alexander's experience was that he didn't have his body anymore. They lost the awareness of the body and stepped outside of time as we understand it. And I'm sure that's true for anybody who really steps outside of the body. There's no story anymore. There's no history anymore going on as there was when we're in the world. Okay. On the right column 3, I already talked about it, neither more Johnny, that heaven is a place. The atonement is a defense which cannot be misused because we have free will. However, it can be refused. And that's an important point. What we're doing actually is we're consistently, day by day, minute by minute, refusing the atonement. And we're refusing to accept the fact that this could all be undone. And it could be undone in an instant. We could let go of this whole insanity which is inside our minds. The Course spends a lot of time talking about sanity and insanity, or reason or reasonableness, or unreasonableness. And it's really trying to get us back to sanity. Sanity is a place at which we make the right choices. Where we make the choice for God. Going on down that same page. Atonement might be equated with a total escape from the past, total lack of interest in the future. Heaven is here, there's nowhere else. Heaven is now, there's no other time. So in this world, what we experience is evolution. We experience that there is time. So it looks like in this world that we have to go through a series of steps and stages as we progress. Actually, when you get around to looking at the 10 characteristics of a teacher of God that's in the Manual for Teachers of the Course in Miracles. The first of these is the development of trust, and there's 6 stages in the development of trust. So in time, in the world, we go through this process. The Course in Miracles is a process. The atonement is a process by which we hope slowly. It's like you get it, but then you don't get it. So then you get it again, and it's like the idea is to get it, but now hold it. Continue to hold it a little bit longer than you held it before. We keep regressing and we keep slipping back, but you get it, you hold it, you get it, you hold it, you get it, you hold it. And then you get it to the point where you're just holding it with consistency. So the insanity doesn't come up. And if it does come up, you catch it quicker. So that the quicker you catch it, you start to maybe use a curse word or something, right? Where you damn something. And then where's that coming from? Why would I damn something? Why would I go in that kind of a direction? And so I stop it right now. This is the whole purpose of the Course. Is who published the Course? Is the foundation for inner peace, right? So that's what we're getting to, inner peace. And we really get to inner peace, that's what we want. Can you imagine if there's anything more that you want than inner peace. Huh? Right. We'll just do a few minutes more and then we'll take a break. So the problem with this is that it requires commitment. It actually requires a total commitment to doing this. On the right, on page 3 at the bottom. When Helen, who described the course, at one point complained to Jesus that it wasn't working for her, he says, well, why don't you do what I'm asking you to do so you can hear my voice even better? It's not that this process doesn't work. You've got to work the process. So that's the whole thing about the course, is that as you begin to do the course, the more you do the course, the more the course begins to do you. And the more the course does you, then this is an alchemical process. It gets more and more exciting because you see the miracles. I mean, you begin to see the results. Your mind is clearer in the decision-making process, for example, right? Reading all this further there. As with all things, time, success is impossible with a firm commitment has been established. All thinking is erratic until this firm commitment has been made. A firm commitment, and you all know that great passage from page 448, which I've already shared with you on a previous session, but let's just look at it one more time, especially for those who have been here before. This is the only thing you need to do for vision, happiness, release from pain, and a complete escape from sin, all to be given you. Say only this. And now there's this next great line. But mean it with no reservation. So you have to mean this. And then, of course, you know what you say. I'm responsible for what I see. I choose the feelings I experience. I decide upon the goal I would achieve. And everything that seems to happen to me, I ask for and I receive as I am. So that means the course is about being responsible. Totally 100% responsible. Some of you, I'm sure, have done the forum or asked, which is what I got out of that. That you're responsible. You are totally responsible for wherever you find yourself, which means that you can't project. I mean, you can't bitch and complain about whatever it is that's going on in your life, because that is your choice. You put yourself there, and now you just have to make another decision to help you to live with it. So we're up to page 4. So I said we'd stop up here over now, so let's take a 10-minute break.